Wales this week, more from the Donington Park Dirt Bike Show and the concluding part of Keith Sumner's charity ride around Great Britain. But first, Jeff and I take a look back at some of the most impressive bikes of the last 10 years. Well, we're well and truly into the 21st century now, and motorcycling technology is moving on at a fair old rate. So we thought it was about time we just stopped for a moment and had a little look back. A look back to the last decade, to the 1990s, and in particular, important bikes of the 90s, and especially some of the bikes that we featured on two wheels.
Well, the 90s certainly started with a bang, particularly for Kawasaki, and it wasn't bang as in the explosion, it was this, the ZZR 1100, 174 miles an hour. Now, going back to 1990, this was really something, because I had a GPZ 900R, which was introduced in '84, and that was clocked at 154 miles an hour. So this one was a big leap, and they actually blew everyone's minds with this. Now, it's a bit of a heavy old beast, but it's an ideal long-distance tourer, and so sorted was this bike, the thing has remained virtually unchanged through 10 years until we come up to this one, which is the current shape, not actually the current model, but it's the current shape. All they've really done to it, titivated it up a little bit, cosmetically changed the silencers, wider back tyre, tidied up the inside of the fairing, and that's it. It's still an absolutely bulletproof motor, and for long-distance touring, I think it's fantastic. In fact, I bought one.
But if you weren't into ultimate speed, perhaps it didn't matter. You didn't need to own the fastest production bike in the world. You wanted a bike that had street cred and had sports ability, then this is what you would have owned in the early 90s. A Yamaha FZR 1000 X-Up, 1000 cc's of great performing engine, good for 150 mile an hour plus. X-Up, if you remember, stands for Exhaust Ultimate Performance, and it's a valve, basically a valve system in the exhaust which opens and closes, allows the engine to breathe a bit more easily, develop its power a bit more freely. But the early ones were famous for having sticking X-Up valves. The valve used to stick open in the exhaust, and it was a bit of a pain, made it run like a bit of a dog, really. That really was all that was ever wrong with this. As I say, smashing performer, good handling, loads and loads of street cred, and the bike to own in the early 90s.
But the days of the X-Up were numbered, because the big H wasn't going to let Yamaha get away with it. So in 1992, they rewrote the rule book, and they brought out this, the CBR 900 Fireblade. And it was really radical for its time. It's very tiny, as you can see, 900 cc's, but look how short it is, very short wheelbase, tiny 16-inch front wheel, and the riding position was quite sort of extreme for those days. You were really up here, right over the front. But an incredible sports bike, being successful for all its life, and in fact it's still in production now, as you well know, and a lot of people still say, despite the R1, that it's still the #1 sports bike.
Well, if you weren't tempted by Honda's CBR 900 Fireblade, 900 cc's, loads and loads of power, razor sharp handling, then Honda had another model that they could tempt you with, this, the CBR 600. This really isn't strictly a bike of the 90s because it had been around since the late 80s, but by now, 1992, it changed to the FN model. It had some modifications and some revisions in the engine, in the suspension, some little tweaks and refinements. The body shape had changed since the original design of the late 80s, and of course lots more colour schemes available. Still in production today, like the Fireblade, still going very strong, the CBR, and of course over the years it's had ram air. The new one now has got fuel injection, so even more power. But even in 1992 it was up to 100 brake horsepower, so plenty and plenty of poke there for even the most demanding of riders. And of course a dual seat on this one, so it's a kind of a sports bike with comfort, eh? Who's ever thought that would ever happen? I suppose it's what you might call the civilised race rep.
Talking about race reps, this was Kawasaki's answer. Nothing about civilised sports bikes in this one. This was real in-your-face stuff, marked out by these big vacuum cleaner hoses here, taking fresh air from the front into the carbs up there. Its styling was all aggressive, all in your face. One of the distinctive things about this bike, though, was the rear suspension, because it was hardly suspension at all. It was absolutely rock hard. But nevertheless, a bit of a hooligan bike, 750 cc's, a lot of poke there. Looked the business in '92. But then they changed this in 1996 to the ZX7R. Much more civilised, but still a very neat bike. Very distinctive air scoops up the front there. And of course, Chris Walker did incredibly well on one of these. So this is still a top contender, top 750.
Okay, forget the sports bike for a moment, because this bike is definitely worth a mention. It came out in 1994, BMW's R1100 GS. Quite different for its day, different styling for a start, especially the front end, a weird looking front end, sort of two mud guards. I remember I referred to this as the bike with the beak. If that was yellow, it'd look perfectly like a beak, wouldn't it? But the GS sort of range had been around for a while with BMW, but in '94, as I say, this was quite unusual. 1100 cc's, flat boxer twin engine, paralever swinging arm, telelever front end, remember those? The weird thing, when you press the front brake, it doesn't dive. Front end doesn't go down, it just stops in a straight line. A bit weird until you get the hang of it. But this is a cracking bike. If I could own a collection of bikes in my garage, this would definitely be in it, because it can be as civilised as you like. You can sit here all day long, great riding position. That actually is really effective. Little screen there, throws all the wind over your head. You don't get a massive amount of wind on your chest. But it's comfort. You could load it up with panniers, top boxes, sit on this all day long, do an awful lot of miles. Also, it can be as mad as you like. It can be a really crazy bike because you take all your luggage off. Even the seat splits in two. You can take that back bit off there and have it as a single seat, and it can be a crazy bike to ride, believe me. I owned one of these for about a month or so, that was all, and then I had to give it back. And I can tell you, I surprised a few sports bike riders in that time. A cracking bike.
Now, you can't mention the 90s without mentioning Ducati's 916. Okay, this is a 996, but you know what I mean? This very distinctive shape, those distinctive headlights, very, very slim fairing, very nice, sexy shaped tank there. Single-sided swinging arm, of course. This really has become a style icon. In fact, so much so that it's appeared in art galleries throughout the world. It really is something to lust after. But of course, it's not only what it looks like, it's the way it goes as well. And by golly, did it go. Big double overhead camshaft, V-twin engine, desmodromic valve gear, classic Ducati stuff. This one started life 916, but then 1998, they blew it up to a 996. And that's when they introduced the Foggy Rep. Now, I rode the Foggy Rep and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. The handling was superb, the braking was superb, the engine, everything about it was absolutely brilliant. So forget the style and the fancy upswept exhaust and all the rest of it. This is a fantastic bike as it is.
So way back at the start of the 90s, the sports bike to own, as we've said, was Yamaha's FZR 1000 X-Up, but that only lasted until 1992 when Honda brought the blade along and blew the X-Up out of the water. So Yamaha, not to be outdone, in 1996 launched this, the YZF 1000 Thunder Race. This was in direct competition to Honda's Fireblade. Massive amount of power with this, 145 brake horsepower. You'd think that would be good enough to beat anything. Well, on performance, yeah, it probably was. But handling-wise and probably styling-wise as well, it never quite cut it. It wasn't quite as nimble as the Fireblade. And it's gained a bit of a reputation now for being a sort of a sports tourer because it's a fairly big bike and it's quite comfortable as well. Dual seat instead of the split seat that we've got on the Blade, so it doesn't quite look as sporty. And as I say, people refer to it as a sports tourer now, which I think is a bit unfair because it still is a great performance bike. So, whilst the Thunder Race had failed against the Fireblade, at the same time, Yamaha also launched the Thunder Cat, and that was in direct competition to Honda's CBR 600. And a similar scenario, really. Didn't quite cut it. It looked very much like a CBR 600, still had a dual seat on it, the same sort of sports styling, but not too radical, quite easy to ride. Had a cracking engine, the Thunder Cat. Bulletproof engine, really, I would say. Loads and loads of mid-range, very usable power. Nice, easy bike to ride, especially around town. You didn't have to rev it to get the best out of it. But never really cut it against the CBR 600. I'm not really sure why, and in my opinion, still one of the most underrated 600s of the 90s.
Now, we started the programme back in 1990 with Kawasaki's ZZR 1100, 174 miles an hour that was, and Kawasaki ruled the roost right up until 1996 when Honda came out with this. This was the Honda CBR 1100 XX Super Blackbird. Quite a mouthful, that one, but nevertheless, this was 186 miles an hour, or so they said. I don't think anyone ever actually achieved it. But this was a bike that was super smooth, and some would say super bland, but that's a little bit unkind. I actually rode this one in '96, and in fact, it was the first bike that we road tested on two wheels. But what struck me about it, it was smooth, it was very, very quiet, and it had link braking as well, which was a bit of a novelty. I quite liked it. Far more nimble than the ZZR 1100, but it has got this reputation as being a little bit bland and a bit ordinary, but nevertheless, typical Honda reliability, typical Honda quality, a rock-solid bike, and a real classic. Now, we haven't mentioned Triumph yet, but in the early 90s, they came back on the scene and they had two main engines. There was a big 1204 and their three-cylinder one. There's a Daytona there, and you could also get the Trophy and an early Sprint. But then in 1997, this came on the scene, the T595, now the 955i, a mixture of numbers, but basically the same bike. Very distinctive frame, twin tube, aluminium spar frame here. And this one has been the painted model, but the early one was shiny aluminium. It looked really quite the business. Plastic petrol tank, which was pretty new then. But the big thing is it had electronic fuel injection. In fact, a whole electronic engine management system, which was very, very sophisticated for its time then. It had a single-sided swinging arm as well. And one thing it became famous for was its front brake. Absolutely fantastic front brake. One finger job, you could really stand in it on its nose. But the engine is something that I've always liked. If you've been watching the programme for a while and you've watched me on Triumphs, I love that three-cylinder engine. It's got a beautiful feel to it, lots of torque, lots of character, and goes really well. I tested one of the early ones, a yellow one, and I even took one like this, a red one, off to France. Superb bike, a very good all-rounder. Not an out-and-out sports bike, but a very, very good all-rounder. I like it a lot.
Certainly the most popular title, the most sought after title in the biking world is that of top sports bike, and since 1992 that had been Honda's CBR 900, the Fireblade. But in 1998 Yamaha decided to have another go at the blade, and this is what they did it with, the YZF 1000, the R1. Fantastic looking sports bike in anyone's book, gone a bit more angular now, very, very pointy fairing and fantastic colours, red and white, and there's also blue and white available as well. Smashing looking bike, 1000 cc's in what is essentially a 600cc size of bike physically. Very, very small, very short wheelbase, gives it fantastic handling, really, really sharp handling, fantastic brakes, tremendous performance. The acceleration on one of these really can be quite frightening. And I remember the first time I ever rode an R1, one of my first thoughts was, this is extremely powerful, and people who have never ridden a powerful machine before should not get on one of these without quite a lot of instruction, because you can do yourself a lot of damage on a bike like this. It is extremely powerful in the wrong hands. It can be quite dangerous in the wrong hands, but in the right hands, an absolute joy. It's fantastic, one of the best bikes I've ever ridden without doubt. And of course, it won the battle, and now it sits proudly at the top of the sports bike table. And so, following on from the success of the R1 against the Blade, Yamaha decided to have a little dig at Honda's CBR 600. So they launched the R6. Very similar to look at and similar in size to the R1, not physically a very big bike, but 600 cc's now. Again, fantastic performance, terrific handling, very, very sharp steering, and again, fantastic brakes. And I remember my first experience of an R6 was in the pouring rain, which is far from ideal conditions. But even then, it was no doubt that this was certainly going to be a bike to be reckoned with.
Well, we'll leave the 90s bikes there for now, and we'll continue the story next week with bikes like Suzuki's GSX-R 600, Honda's Firestorm, Suzuki's TL1000, the Hayabusa, and of course Kawasaki's ZX-12R. And coming up after the break, more from the Donington Dirt Bike Show and part 2 of Keith Sumner's charity ride around Great Britain.
Now, as at any bike show, you see all the normal kind of names, people that we're used to seeing every day, Kawasaki's, Suzuki's, Honda, Yamaha, all the rest of it. And sometimes there's some unusual names, things you've not heard of before. And occasionally there's names that crop up that you've not heard of for many years, like this one, Greaves, a name from the past, around many years ago. Of course, I'm far too young to remember Greaves, but I know a man who is old enough over there.
You know, he's a bit cheeky, is that Paul, innit? But in actual fact, he is correct. I do remember Greaves. I must admit, they were out when I was born, but when I was about 7 or 8 years old, the old man gave me an old Honda C50, which wasn't roadworthy anymore, and he says, go out on the mud and go and play and enjoy motorcycling. I did, and a fella came along with a bike called a Greaves Griffin. I thought it was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. I got to go, and that was my instigation, my introduction to motocross. And Greaves is a fantastic name from the past. What's happened is Greaves stopped producing motorcycles, and then a fella came along only about a year ago and says, why not, let's produce quality motorcycles under the badge Greaves. And that's exactly what they've done. Now this bike will cost you £4,000, or a bit more in actual fact. And in those days, way back when, they would have only cost you a couple of £100. But then again, This is a complete reproduction. Every article has been remade to perfection. And not only is it on the outside beautiful, even the crank like that on the inside is beautifully made as well. It is absolutely gorgeous. All right, mate, how are we doing? Do you know you can buy everything at these shows? There's stands all over the place selling every type of kit, including casual gear. Look at that, 20 quid for the fleece. Only 25 quid there for a hooded jacket taster. Stuff to fit me even. A pair of pyjamas. 5 to 6 year old. Perfect. But obviously being an off-road show, there's bound to be off-road gear. Complete with the glitter. 26 inch, my size. In fact, there's even kit to fit Paul, look here. Triple XL. Oi, Mr. Cameraman, that's it, come over here to me. Wheels. Not very exciting wheels, is it? It's very exciting if you've got a motocross bike of which you want to put on the road, because you need a second set of wheels, because the ones that are on it, especially with a 21-inch front, are useless. You can't buy a road tyre for that, so you change your wheels. You can buy a complete wheel now for any machine you want. You can have what colour you want, what rim size you want, the width of rim you want, you name it, you can have it. Just like these here, this is an XR 600 wheel. You can have every different colour and so on and so forth. Obviously it's going to cost you a few quid, like 400 and some pounds upwards, depending on your demands. Now if you reckon from what you see here that these wheels are built by a small pocket industry, a little place in the back, and an old bloke winding some spokes on, oh boy, no. Because this company is a massive organisation. They produce wheels for Triumph and CCM. And you can imagine the order size they've got at the moment with Triumph because of the new Bonneville, spoke wheel Bonneville. They need to make hundreds in a very short period of time. So yes, we're dealing with the big boys. Now I did tell you, didn't I, earlier on, that you could indeed buy absolutely anything here at the Dirt Bike Show. Well, they are, that says it all. Look at that, GoPeds. And not only is there GoPeds to be bought, there's even mini motos. And I do wish they'd do an off-road version, that'd suit me down to the ground, my size of bike. And not only that, a man-powered version here, in this little thing as well. I wonder if you want paying for this. Excuse me, I've been looking for you absolutely everywhere. It's time to be off. Now come on.
You'll recall last week we left Keith Sumner in London halfway through his round Britain journey. Time now to head north.
I know London was a nightmare, traffic-wise.
Yeah.
The best roads then? Scotland, I'm guessing?
Yeah, probably the west coast of Scotland, Glencoe, round Loch Ness, there's some footage, you got some good on bike footage around there, that was stunning. The low points, the worst bit of it were in Scotland as well, which is really, when I left Stirling, I'd made the mistake of looking at the map the night before, and as you say, I'd done a massive, massive leg, you know, looking at the map, I'd done 3/4 the length of Britain in a day, or something like that, and all I was looking at doing was sort of Stirling to John McGroats, which is, you know, it's only 1.5 inches.
Yeah.
Oh, it's 1.5 inches, mate.
It depends how big your map is.
Well, I was very scientific. I had the travelling map of where the travel-ins are around the UK, so, you know. But it looked a small joint, but it was thick with fog, it was bitterly cold, and it was so remote, so like from Stirling to Inverness, I hated every moment of that ride. Right. That was the only time I was unhappy on the bike. I couldn't feel my fingers, couldn't feel my hands. There was no traffic to speak of. The only signs of life were dead animals on the road.
Dear.
It was horrible, really, really desolate. And as it Inverness, the fog lifted.
The road opened up.
The road opened up, and it was stunning. You know, if I'd not been carrying as much luggage, we could. And obviously, I was sticking to the speed limit.
Of course,
naturally.
Don't doubt that for 1 minute.
But yeah, I mean, if I'd not been sticking to the speed limit, I'd have quite enjoyed myself.
I'm sure you would. I'm sure you would. Yeah. So then you get up there, then that's the highest point, geographically speaking. Then we come back, East Kilbride, and then your mates come back to meet you, didn't you?
Yeah, to Glasgow, yeah.
That's a fair ride for them.
It was quite touching, really, because the weather wasn't great either. On the Friday that they came up, it was, down here the weather was lousy, it was actually very, very hot in Glasgow.
So then, they ride back here with you?
Yeah, well, what
You
we
come
did,
back
we
here?
came down as far as Carlisle. I help out with a CBT and DAS school, and a lot of ex-pupils and people that just know me because they know me, sort of thing, came up, met us at Carlisle. So there was 6 of us rode down from Glasgow, sort of thing, and the weather was terrible. It was absolutely throwing it down. And we got to Carlisle. We were supposed to be meeting a few people, and sort of like 28 bikes turned up.
Wow.
Which was superb.
Pretty touching that as well.
Oh
isn't it?
yeah, I mean there was a lump in my throat.
I can
to be honest
imagine,
with
yeah,
you,
you must have been filling up there, yeah.
Yeah, well we did actually, because there was a BP station just round the corner.
I didn't mean that well. So and then back here to a big party.
Yeah.
So, did they think, do all your mates think you're mad?
I think so,
They do
yeah.
think there aren't many people would take that on.
It was something I've always wanted to do.
And this
and Paul's illness, if anything good came out of it, it was good that we managed round here to really raise awareness of meningitis, because the Evening Post, the local paper, gave us a lot of coverage. The local radio station, Rock FM, gave us quite a bit of coverage. So we raised, you know, I didn't know what meningitis was. I know what leukemia is. Right. Everybody knows what that is. Everybody knows what breast cancer is. Everybody knows what cancer is. But up to the ride, or up until Paul getting it, I didn't know what meningitis was. So if anything good came out of it, it was that it gave me, just as a normal lad in the street, the chance to do something good to raise the awareness of a really nasty, nasty disease.
Excellent.
You know.
Well, I wish you all the very best.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
And good luck. Keep up the good work.
Cheers, thank you.
Well done, Keith.
Nice one. Thank you, mate.
And on Two Wheels next week, more impressive sports bikes of the 1990s. And for those of you not too keen on cleaning during the winter months, perhaps you'd like to keep your sports bike tucked up warm and dry. If so, you'll need a second machine. Jeff has a couple of ideas.